Today's guest on the podcast is Liane Davey. Now, Liane is a consultant, very successful author, and I talk about a little bit when I'm introducing her at the beginning of the interview with her. But she is a really fascinating lady. I was really enjoyed the book that we're talking about in The Good Fight. And we do talk an awful lot about, what are the things that really hold teams back? What are the things that she talks about, the concept of conflict debt and how that, where that has reached is the sum of the issues that we don't talk about, why we don't talk about it, why we're actually so slow to have conflict. And conflict is healthy. Conflict is not necessarily a negative thing at all. And also the failure to prioritize. We talk a lot about that, and she's passionate about that, and is very entertaining in terms of the way she talks about organizations' failure and inability to prioritize. So for anyone leading a team or part of a team, this is a podcast that's really worth listening to, and it does kind of all lead to building what we refer to as winning teams, which is the title of this podcast. But it is all about building those high-performing teams, and Liane is an expert in that space, and she does have a PhD in organizational psychology, and that's very evident when you listen to her. So I really do encourage you to listen to Liane. If you like this podcast, please give it a good review and how it gets us out to many more people. And that's the objective, that we really are sharing the content that we want to share. So please, listen to it, review us, share it if you can. We'd be delighted to do that. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to the very, very interesting Liane Davey. Liane, it's great to have you here with us today. I'm really delighted, and I was looking forward to doing this interview.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm taking our conversations off of LinkedIn and onto voice to voice. So much better.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just let me, before I ask you to give a little bit of background, because I know you'll be far too humble to say what I'm going to say about you, but you are a best-selling author of 3 books, of which we're actually going to focus in and talk about one of them today. You're a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review and are frequently asked by media outlets to comment on things that are connected to business. And you do have a stellar client list in 3Co's Inc., which includes the likes of Walmart, UNICEF, 3M, and Amazon, amongst many others. So you have, and by the way, also I should say that Daniel Pink, who is one of my favorite authors as well, gave you a great recommendation for your book, and he said, if you feel like your organization is mired in a rut, you definitely need The Good Fight, which is the book that you authored. So after all of that, very, very nice things that I've said about you, maybe say a little bit about your background and how you got to be where you are.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, I'll do my best to answer that. And just to balance out the best-selling author thing, I'll say it all started when I flunked calculus in first year uni. How's that? Which got me off the science path and into finding the next year this program called organizational psychology. And really, it's been a 30-year trip of just loving this field more than anything else. So I did a PhD in industrial organizational psychology and have been in the consulting space since the very first day that I started working 24 years ago now. And now 7 years into having my own business with my husband as my business partner, and working with mostly CEOs and their teams on all things collaboration. So great fun.
Okay, good. So interesting when you talk about the book, The Good Fight. I want to come back to that. But one of the topics in the book is about conflict. Yes. So what's it like working with your husband? Is there any conflict in that?
So we're not. I actually did a chapter at the very end of the book called "Try This at Home," which was unlike those commercials you see on TV where it's like professional stunt driver, don't try this at home. I said conflict you definitely want to try at home. And neither Craig nor I are really great at conflict. We both don't like it much. So we had to invest a lot of time in getting better at it. And the fun thing actually is working together is the opposite of conflict. That's the primary source of joy. We love it. So 7 years in, and we can't wait for the next 7. It's been great fun.
And still married, so that's not
Still
bad,
married,
is it?
just celebrated 25 years, coming up on 26 now. So
well,
yeah.
Congratulations. So the byline for the book, The Good Fight, is use productive conflict to get your team and organization back on track. And you know that I work with a lot of teams, and conflict is one of those issues. You talk about the concept of conflict debt, and where it's the sum of all of the issues that remain, kind of, that we haven't talked about. How big is this debt in teams, is from your perspective and from your experience?
Yeah, pretty massive. Massive.
And why is it that, I would agree with that, by the way, but why is it that we just don't do it?
Yeah. Okay. So when I used to be a teaching assistant at university, when I was in grad school, people that started essays with "since the beginning of time" always lost a grade. But this answers a little bit of "since the beginning of time," which is something really interesting I learned recently. Was they asked the anthropologist Margaret Mead for the first evidence that humans' competitive advantage as animals was our cooperation and our collaboration. She said, well, actually, the evidence is from 15,000 years ago. And what they found was a femur bone with the evidence it had fully fractured and fully healed. And she said, that's amazing evidence that we collaborate and cooperate, because it takes 6 weeks for a femur bone to heal, and you're 100% vulnerable during that time. So somebody had to protect this person and find them food. And so I always say, okay, so don't beat yourself up if you don't like conflict, because we got 15,000 years of evolution encouraging us to get along. That's kind of how we survived. So that's the first thing. It's biological, especially with our in-group, not so much with our out-group. Unfortunately, those same things make us quick to have very unhealthy conflict with those we deem as others. Second thing, we're socialized to learn that conflict is impolite, unproductive. For 50% of us, that is not ladylike. So strong socialization against conflict. And then the third one would just be organizations themselves don't know how to cope with conflict. So we have these value statements on brass plaques on the walls about teamwork and respect, and we haven't figured out how to have conflict productively. So most people just don't have it at all. So we've got 15,000 years and then lots of recent and salient history telling us that we're not supposed to have conflict.
And to actually break down a team, sorry, that might be a unfortunate choice of words, but to actually break it down in a team, because you do have to actually break something down, because it's become a habit. It's become the way we are. We were accustomed to it. We have all of these kind of, unspoken deals. Well, I won't challenge you and then you won't challenge me. And we've never articulated that, but it's actually understood.
Clear though.
How do you actually get a team to really break that habit and to start the process of finding a way to have conflict that is healthy?
Yeah, so the first thing is I just go in and tell them what the definition of conflict is, because most of them carry this baggage about how conflict is about, hurting people or being unproductive or war or all this imagery. And so I just tell them the definition of conflict is a struggle between incompatible or opposing needs, wishes, and demands. And anybody who works in an organization has had 10 of those by noon. So just, taking back the word and saying, we have to struggle with incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands all the time, including, we don't have enough budget or enough people to do all the things we wish we could do. And if we did, we wouldn't have enough time. We have to make plans, but also see assumptions and risks in those plans. And we don't want to hear that after we've built a plan, that there's a hole in it. And yet it's very important. We need to get feedback about things that we wish we didn't have to. We wish we were perfect the first time. So I start there. Then helping the team, I use this exercise that we go around, and for each role on the team, we talk about what is the unique value that role brings to the team's deliberations. And, how do they represent different stakeholders, and what are they obliged to put tension on the discussion with? And it's amazing how once you do this exercise and people can realize and be clear and have language for how they have very different roles and how those roles are supposed to be in tension with one another, then they relax a little bit. They understand that, everybody is there to fight for something. So, typical example, a sales leader in an organization, I was working with a food company, big food company, and they sell to the major grocery chains. So, his answer was, I'm here to make sure we're really helping to differentiate our product for the different grocery stores so that it fits with their brand and all those sorts of things. So I'm really about customizing and differentiating. And as he was talking, the head of operations is sort of laughing so he didn't cry, I think. And he just said, now it all makes so much sense because I run operations and I'm here to make everything more consistent, more scalable, more efficient. And it was just a really powerful moment, because then all of a sudden you say, if we're doing our jobs well, we will be in constant tension with one another. Sales fighting for more and more differentiation for the customer, and ops fighting for more and more consistency to create efficiency. And, that's how it's supposed to be. So, when we go through those exercises, so the first pieces are around really changing mindset before we even start on skills. I think crucial conversations, fierce conversations, all these sorts of things, once we get to the conversation, it's a different question, but I think most don't even get to the conversation. So the good fight starts long before the conversation with, okay, what's your mindset? What's your baggage about conflict? And how do we kind of reframe that?
And if listening to you there, what I also am hearing is that in an organization where we're very siloed, that creates that kind of, well, I just do my bit and somebody else does their bit, and we don't communicate. So we don't actually understand sometimes why what I'm doing is in fact very much in conflict with my colleague, but we don't really go there because all I'm focused in on is my own silo.
Yeah, and I think the silos are exacerbated by, we also do a really poor job of having goals align across an organization. So I have a vested, this operations person in this example, all of his metrics, his KPIs, his rewards are all around efficiency and scrap rates and, lost time and all those sorts of things. Well, no wonder it feels very uncomfortable when he has to kind of wrestle with the salesperson around, what's the optimum thing to be working on. So we've got silos. Those silos are allowed to exist by poor alignment. Then they're reinforced by misaligned metrics. And the result of all of it is very, very little empathy for what it needs to look like for somebody else. And so it kind of is a perfect storm. And so we tend to go in two directions. Some teams in that case will then just fight. It'll be nasty and pitched battle and retrenching. But the more often the result is we just don't talk about it. We just stay heads down. We get into more and more conflict. We just keep doing our own thing until something causes it to kind of blow up.
Yeah, the other thing that you talk about in the good fight, which is something that is very close to my own heart, and I'm always kind of slightly fascinated by it in some ways, is this issue of what you refer to as the failure to prioritize as being the most prevalent of all conflict deaths. And I work in lots of organizations, and I kind of say, okay, well, can we actually talk about what are the team's top 3 priorities? And that's never a quick discussion, right?
No.
Never, right? and why is it that with all of the tools, I mean, from balance scorecards, from OKRs, from KPIs, from we have all of the tools and all of the acronyms and all of the everything else that should help us to do that. Why do we struggle so much to prioritize?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most sort of multifaceted issues. As a psychologist, maybe an answer that you don't hear very often is that, part of our work with any executive team is doing psychological assessment. And so we're, about 15 years into assessing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of top team members. And what we're seeing is that by far the rewarded learned behavior is expedience. And, people who rush to closure, to action at this expedient kind of profile. And the expedient person just loves action and just adds the next thing to the list and is much, much, much less rewarded by, stopping to be deliberate about what we're not going to do. So there is a psychological profile that has been rewarded and has been promoted in organizations. And we're really starting to find that people with the other way of thinking are endangered species in leadership teams. So that's one. There's a sort of a psychological piece. I think that the world is so competitive.
Sorry, can I just pause you there for a second? Just curious before you go on to the next point. So we're saying that what you're saying is that expedience is rewarded as opposed to thoughtful. Is that what as opposed to thoughtfulness or being thoughtful or being reflective?
Yeah, so, or making choices, right? So
making choices. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. So there's, there are a couple of different profiles that would support effectively moving from strategy to a plan. And those people who are good at moving from a strategy to a plan, very, very hard to find in leadership teams.
And why? Because then that says in very simplistic terms, and I appreciate this, is being simplistic, but we find it very hard to say no.
That's exactly it. And I think that isn't oversimplifying. we find it very hard to say no. And then if you take the competitive environment and you say somebody at some point has been punished for not doing something. So we're into this sort of roulette strategy where we put one chip on every square. So we don't win big, but at least we don't lose. And again, we know psychologically fear of loss is a much stronger motivator of humans than possibility of gain. So we're putting one chip on each square, being like, well, at least if that comes up, nobody will be able to point to me and say, why didn't you put a chip on that square? But we have one chip on each square and we're diluting the resources to the point where we don't win big either. We just, I think what's interesting in our economy now is we do see these sort of unicorn companies come up that don't have a vested interest, can put all the chips on one square. We don't see the ones that go bankrupt because of that, but we see the ones where that can really disrupt an existing organization that's trying to cover all their bases.
So we like putting a bet on every horse in the race.
We
just
do.
So that we
because then we don't have to have that embarrassment at the end of the race of of losing. We didn't actually win, but you
would be amused, or maybe amused may not be the word, but I'm probably not surprised, because recently in a conversation that I had with the team, I was arguing that because they showed me their kind of priorities, which was just an extremely long list, right? And I said, so what are the top three? Oh, and there was a real discomfort about doing that. And one of the reasons for not actually narrowing it down to top 3 or 4 was, well, see, then if we do that, then somebody in the team, their function is not going to be included in the priority.
Oh yeah, we don't like that. We don't like upsetting people. We don't like being the bad guy. No, that's a huge, huge problem. So the interesting thing, another piece of work that will probably be the next book, is I'm working on the distinctions between workload and what I call thought load. And what's happening is our thought load is so heavy at the moment. All the things we're fretting about, worrying about, where are we at on this? When am I going to do this? That even when we decide that we are going to work on something, we're so inefficient at processing our workload because our thought load has us so distracted and anxious. So I think this is a big problem. So I really encourage people, if your people cannot tell you at any given moment what the single most important thing they need to be paying attention to is, you have abdicated your responsibility as a leader and you have failed them. Because if they cannot tell you the single most important thing they need to be focusing on, their thought load will be, processing so many different things they'll be much less efficient, much more stressed. And that's really a path to very low efficiency for all these expedient people who think that having 17 priorities is going to get more done. It doesn't, of course. And I actually saw some McKinsey data recently. McKinsey showed some data about if you can give people 90 days of certainty around what their most important work is and what they're focused on, they're seeing productivity gains of 50 to 60%.
Wow.
Yeah, like if you think about the billions of dollars attached to a productivity gain of 50 to 60%. And, you know, I'm hearing people saying, I don't have 90 minutes of certainty of what matters most. So, you know, leaders are failing people left, right, and center, failing them out of the fear of what if I pick the wrong thing, or the fear of saying back to their own manager of, okay, this is what we're going to work on first. They just pass on the misery and the thought load, and therefore the inefficiency. It is pretty dire at the moment. I'm not very happy or optimistic about.
No, I mean, I find it quite distressing, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I've been being very honest, and I find it, you know, I mean, I coach a lot of senior people in large organizations, and I genuinely feel for them, because I see them,
do. Absolutely.
see them really overwhelmed by you know, what they're actually being asked to carry. And I think that what you were talking about, that thought overload is actually a really good description of it. I hadn't heard it coined in that way, but that's a very good description of it. And I think it's huge. The other form of death that you talk about in the good fight is that despite all our desire, and despite all that's written about having high performing teams and building high performing teams, it's our failure to deal with the perennial poor performers, as you refer to them. Why are we so reluctant to do that, in your opinion? Because it does seem to be almost a contradiction in terms when we say we want to build a high performing team, but at the same time we're tolerating it, and they're just completely in conflict with each other.
Well, since we're being candid, selfishness, complete selfishness on the part of managers. So the manager doesn't want to have the uncomfortable conversations. So the manager prioritizes their comfort over all of the teammates who are having to pick up the slack and suffer with that person. In today's world, the other thing is the number of times I'm hearing people say, well, I'd rather have a warm body than no body. And they, again, just not at all thinking about the collateral damage that does to the strong performers who don't deserve to work with somebody who's not, you know, pulling their weight, or worse, who's inflicting harm. It's really inexcusable. And then, you know, certainly I see people who are too nice. They're like, well, they've been here a long time, or they're loyal, and, you know, it's nice, but it's certainly not kind, because once somebody has lost the confidence of the manager or the team, it's quite inhumane and awful. So what I see in teams is, and I'm working with a couple of teams now where this has happened, the leader doesn't make eye contact with that person. So everybody knows that they're failing, and then nobody wants to be associated with the failing person. It's really distressing to watch. So when you have somebody not performing, A, get on it, give the feedback, be there with development, be willing to do things to help them be successful. And, you know, no more than 3 months before that turns into performance improvement. We need to, you know, make a change. But this prolonging it, people who've been there like 3 years.
Yeah, but it's also, Liane, the person that, okay, they're underperforming in the sense of they are being difficult within the team, and they're causing strife within the team. And very often that's, oh, well, that's the way Johnny is. I mean, you know, but, you know, he's really good at his job, but, you know, he's just a bit, you know, difficult like that. And we put up with it. And I always think that's a real cop out as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. You know, one of the things that I'm now thinking about a little bit more than I used to is, I think some of it is neurodiversity. So this one's giving me pause, because now I'm thinking about, okay, some of these people are likely neurodiverse, they don't pick up social cues in the same way that others do. So now the only thing that I have pause on is, okay, how do we also, so diversity, equity, and inclusion is something super important to us in many domains. And yet we haven't really figured out, what do we do with neurodiverse people whose particular neurodiversity is around social interaction, those sorts of things, who come off as brutal or just so blunt that they're hurtful, or they don't pick up cues, or those sorts of things. So that's the only one giving me pause at the moment, is thinking about how can teams get the value of these people, because they tend to be very valuable on certain dimensions. And yet, how can we make environments where we're more understanding? And I think there's lots of people, if I think back over 25 years working with teams, now that I know kind of what some of those neurodiversities look like, I'm like, oh, that's what that was. And we were so intolerant of it. We were kind of nasty about it, or that sort of thing. So that's the only one giving me pause at the moment about how do we help those people contribute? Yeah.
Well, when you write your next book on neurodiversity, come back, because that would be a subject that I'd be fascinated to talk about.
Yeah, so my husband and business partner is a PhD in neuroscience. And so, it's a topic that we need to sort of study more and learn a lot more about. Right now, I'm just in that sort of sensitized phase, which is a horrible phase to be in, because you kind of know you're making the error and haven't yet figured out how to fix it. But, at least we're on the path to understanding that. And I would just encourage your listeners to just think about, are there people who you've perennially thought of as frustrating, annoying, brutal, whatever else, that if you put this lens on it of, is it possible that they're neurodiverse, that they're on the autism spectrum, that they, some variety of different, they process information differently, they have executive functioning challenges, that, why are they always late, or they don't, well, so I just would say, let's all try and just, after today, just be a little sensitized to that, and just kind of ask the question, is it possible that that's what I'm looking at? And then how can I set that person up for success?
Now you're making me feel as if I should be kinder.
I'm all about kind. I am on a mission to try and end nice. I am not a fan of nice. By nice, very passive, and in many cases, nice is the excuse for cowardice. I'm a big believer in kind.
All right. Okay. Well, I would embrace that. One of the things you talk about, the other thing you talk about in the book, which I thought was really interesting, and I think for many teams is a challenge, is you're talking about that the predictor of success, where the team members are tuned into each other's emotional states. And what you're saying is that the collective emotional intelligence of the team predicts success, while their cognitive intelligence, or their collective cognitive intelligence did not.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that cool research?
It is. It's fabulous research. But what I'm curious is that, how do you actually get the team to do that, to tune into each other's emotional states?
Yeah. So sometimes I have to go right back to basics. So on my website, I have Liane's listening drill, which is just taking them right back to basics on listening to one another. And what you usually find is listening skills are very, very weak. So I talk about level 3 listening. Level 1, which is just the remedial listening, comes from the Chinese character for the word listen, which is made up of the character for the ear, the eye, and the heart. So we go back to, okay, are you listening with all 3 of those things? And most people are at most listening with their ears, not their eyes, definitely not their heart. So we start there. Then we work on, how do we listen to the levels of meaning? So instead of listening to the facts and information, which are just carefully curated to make us feel good about how we feel, facts and information in a team or in a fight are quite useless. I always say facts don't solve fights. And how do we listen to, where are we picking up emotion, either in word choice, or if you start to hear somebody using a lot of adjectives, usually that means, or absolutes, you never, you always, that's an emotional sign. Of course, we pick up emotion in pitch and body language. That's when we work on, okay, what do you think is going on for this person? What that they value or believe in is being threatened by this conversation? And when we can get down at that stuff. And then the third level, level 3 listening, which is much like meditation and mindfulness, it's a lifetime's work, is how do we stop listening to the narrator in our own head while someone else is talking and instead listen to the other person. So, that might be our narrator who's judging what they're saying. It may be that we're defending, like, oh, I didn't do that, the voice in our head. Or worse, this is awful, we may be empathizing and relating and identifying. And even still, the voice in our head is like, oh, that's just like I had exactly the same. And then we're listening to our own story, not theirs.
Right, yeah.
So usually the starting place is to go back to drills. And so literally I will make people, before they can add a new point to a conversation, I'll say, okay, can you paraphrase what Sally just said? And often in the first few rounds, either people will be like, and it's quite embarrassing because it's clear that they were just thinking, or they'll just toss off something that's, really poor quality. And in those cases, it's like, okay, Sally, say your thing again. And I've had times where we've had to do 3 rounds before the person actually can capture the meaning. So, sometimes we have to go right back to basics, but listening is the best basic to go back to, because most conflicts on teams are actually not a conflict about the right answer. Most conflicts on teams are, we're both trying to solve, or we're each trying to solve a different issue. And if we could understand and articulate, I'm solving for this, oh, and you're solving for this. Now, how do we figure out something that works for both of those? So when we don't listen well, we think our solutions are opposing, or we think that we can't come to a mutually acceptable position. When we listen better, we tend to understand, oh, we weren't actually solving the right problem from the beginning. So that listening is the best.
You use the word clarifying, and clarifying kind of brings me to one of the things that you talk about a lot, which is, clarifying expectations before you dive into the work. And I wish I had, $1 for every time I said that to somebody, because did you really clarify? And, because that lack of clarity creates so much tension, so much rework, and so much conflict. And
huge.
On both sides, absolutely an enormous waste, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose in some ways I was thinking, well, who's actually responsible? And to me, both sides are responsible for actually getting the clarity. But why is it seemed something that is just so uncomfortable to kind of say, Liane, sorry, can you say that again? Or Liane, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? Or is this what you're asking me? Why do we feel so uncomfortable and clunky about doing that?
Yeah. So I would say part of it is that expedience. When someone's like at the end of a meeting, the manager is just like, so we good? And everybody's like, yeah. Expedience, right? We're all rushing out of the meeting to the next meeting we're already late for. So that's one thing. The second is because we're all just afraid that we don't measure up, or that someone will think we don't measure up. And so if we say that wasn't clear to me, or we don't want to seem like we didn't understand when everyone else did. B, some people don't want to reflect on the boss that actually you're a pretty terrible communicator. Could you try that again? So there's just all this social awkwardness. And the interesting thing is, as we've moved to remote and hybrid teams, there's some research on how the social friction of asking clarifying questions or asking for help is even higher. Because we're even more concerned about what that says about us, that we didn't pick it up the first time. So I'm really encouraging managers to, instead of, sharing something and then ending with the typical, so everybody good? I'm encouraging them to use open-ended questions to just say, okay, so as you reflect on this, what do you see as the most important thing here? Where do you think we're most likely to get into trouble? But using open-ended questions to increase the depth of processing and to leave more room for a dialogue about what the expectations are. And that's even more important when we're in hybrid teams than when we were all together in person, but good practice anywhere.
Absolutely. Liane, we could go on for a long time, and I've taken up more time than I said I would, but I just want to say I highly recommend the book. It's a really good read. And I also think it's a really good how-to for anyone leading a team or being a member of a team. So I highly recommend it. Before we wrap up, and you can let people know how to get in touch with you, 2 questions for my guest. One is a book other than your own that's had an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
One that I come back to and I recommend over and over is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Oh, yeah, it's about effective communication. And I come back to it over and over and over and try and reflect it in my work about making ideas stickier, those sorts of things. Great book for pretty much anyone who has to communicate with others, which I'm going to say is pretty much anyone.
Everybody.
So that would be my book recommendation.
I love that book. It's a while since I've read it, but I do love their stuff. I do love their stuff. Second one is daily rituals. If you have them, happy to share them and what they do for you.
Yeah, daily rituals. So I'm a bullet journaler, and if you don't know about bullet journaling, it is just so to me it is the best technique out there for managing thought load, and it's just a prioritization and kind of it's the to-do list 2.0. And so in there I have my 5 resilience strategies. So I'll just pick one, which is reading fiction. So we understand now through some cool research that reading fiction enhances empathy. And so when I get really busy at work, when I have a lot going on, it's very easy to stop reading fiction. And my work like yours requires a tremendous amount of empathy. So a daily habit of reading a chapter of fiction helps me stay in that kind of empathy mode.
Fantastic. That's a new one for me. I love that. That is great. Liane, thank you so much indeed for being with us today. It's been a real joy. Where can people get in touch with you? We'll put all the information in the show notes, but if they're listening, how can they contact you now?
Yeah, 2 great ways. So LinkedIn for me, I call it my couch. And so that's where I'm trying to have the most important conversations we need to have about work. So connect with me on LinkedIn and come sit on the couch and join the conversation. And then lianedavey.com has over 500 articles, searchable resources about everything that can and will go wrong on Teams and how to set it right.
Well, I can vouch for that because I have had a look around your website and you do have a ton of content there. So it's well worth a visit. Liane, thank you so much indeed for being a guest. It's been a real joy. I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you so much, John. It's been so fun.